There we go. All right, everyone. Welcome to the first ever Shared Voices in Conversation. I'm very excited to be able to share this with you today. My name is Greg Frankson. I am the founder and CEO of VoiceShare Inc. And we are going to get right into it in just a few moments. We're very pleased and privileged to have our special guest with us today, Dr. Catalina Lopez-Correa, who's going to be talking with us about the theme of, taking complex communications and sharing those bits of information more simply and succinctly. So we're going to get into that topic matter in a little bit of time. But as you can also see, the chat box is blowing up. People are checking in, letting us know where they are in the world. We've got some Americans, we've got some Ontarians, we've got people in Alberta, we've got at least one person on the East Coast. So we've got quite the wide range of individuals who are checking in. Please feel free to share who you are and where you're from in the chat box as we continue. So I'm just going to quickly take care of some housekeeping right off the jump. First of all, this event is scheduled to run for about 90 minutes at its maximum, so we will be finished by 1:30. This is my assurance that I give you. We also encourage you all to turn your cameras on. I know that it's not always possible given the situation in which you find yourself physically, and you may have, people crawling over your heads and whatnot, but it makes for a better meeting. It makes for a better session. It makes for more of a community feel if as many people as possible have their cameras on so we can see each other and interact with each other in that way. So we encourage you to do that. During the conversation, unless for some reason you've been acknowledged to actually speak, please keep your microphone on mute. And then when you are called upon, if you are called upon to speak out loud, then you can definitely be acknowledged. We'll be using the raise hand function for that. Throughout the course of the event, please also feel free to use the chat box to continue on those comments and those conversations. I'm going to keep my eye on it as we continue to move forward so that I can address what's happening in the chat box with our guest. And of course, the final thing is, we are recording this conversation so that it can be made available later for people who wish to review it. And that is the end of the housekeeping. So let's just get right into it. And we'll go directly just into introducing people. As I say, I'm the founder and CEO of VoiceShare. I'm also the creator of Shared Voices. And you can join in our conversations about Shared Voices by becoming a member of our Facebook group, which can be found at facebook.com/sharedvoices. I encourage you to join us there. And I am very, very happy and pleased to introduce you to our special guest, who of course is Dr. Catalina Lopez-Correa, who is the Executive Director of the Canadian COVID-19 Genomics Network. And we're going to get right into it with her with respect to what she's about, where she's from, and what she's got to share. You can see her happy, smiling face right there for everyone to look at. And so what I'm going to do is for now, I am going to stop sharing, and I am going to highlight and spotlight, Dr. Lopez-Correa. And so there she is. And, I'll just give you a couple moments to say who you are, where you're from, tell us a little bit about yourself. So go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead.
Yes, well, thank you, Greg, for this invitation. It's a real honor to be the first speaker in this series. And first, I want to acknowledge that I'm now in the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and want to recognize them for having cared for this land for so many years. So yeah, I'm now Vancouver from the West Coast. Very happy to join. And as Greg say, well, in terms of work, I'm now executive director for the Canadian COVID-19 Genomics Network, working with all scientists across Canada that are sequencing and looking at the RNA of this tiny virus that has completely changed our lives. And well, I can tell you a little bit more. I'm originally from Colombia, so Latino woman. I'm married to a woman, so I'm really also a person that has been over the years working and pushing for diversity and for inclusion and equity in science. That's another of my passions. Difficult to say if that's the first or genomics is the first, but both go almost at the same level. So very passionate about those equity, diversity, and inclusion issues. And well, these 20 years I have been working in genomics, basically in Canada for the last 12 years. And before that, I was for a while working in the US. I also did my training and work in Europe, did a master's in Paris in France, a Ph.D. in Belgium, started my working in a biotech in England and then in Iceland, in Reykjavik. So I always say that this scientific career is not just only about looking at small things in the laboratory, like in my case, DNA or RNA, but also seeing the world with science has been also an amazing experience over this past 20 years.
Well, I mean, that's incredible. I am so excited that we have an opportunity to chat in front of everybody and everything like this. And I'm so excited you made some time for us. Any other weird and interesting facts about yourself that you might want to share, something that's totally like unrelated to your career that might be an interesting tidbit?
Well, maybe a little story. I am, as I say, originally from Colombia, and as maybe some of you know, Colombia in the 90s was a country with a lot of violence and of course the cartels and the mafia and the drugs and all that. So traveling with a Colombian passport has always been challenging. And I was, as I say, living in different countries and always permanent resident, but never really was interested or got time enough to apply for a citizenship. But when we came to Canada, we really felt home, that we landed into a place that really embraces us as we are, a country that respects and really is aligned with our personal values. So we did apply for the citizenship and we went through all the process. And the day before we were scheduled for the exam, we were dropping our dog in a farm far away in the midst of Quebec, about 2 hours from Montreal. And it was a very, very heavy snowstorm, low temperatures, lots of ice. And well, we are two Colombians. My partner is she's also from Colombia. So our experience driving in snow, even though we were applying, for the citizenship, and we were very Canadian, we didn't have that much experience, and we had a terrible accident in the ice. Oh. Yeah, fortunately, it was not, big. We didn't end up in the hospital or anything. We were not really badly hurt, just kind of, stiff and bruises all over. We lost the car, but then we were just the next day thinking that if the exam was a driving license, we don't think we will pass. Luckily, we had studied well and we passed the exam, and that was really positive. So once we got the passport, and we were so proud Canadians, we went also in another driving adventure, and that was more successful than our eyes driving. And is that we decided to cross Canada from Prince Edward Island to Vancouver Island, all the way on Highway 1 first, on our way, when we went from Prince Edward to Vancouver. And returning, we decided to take all small roads up north, as north as we could go.
Nice.
and basically see the other reality of Canada, which is not, the big cities that you normally, exactly. Terry Fox journey, except that, we didn't walk, we didn't run, we did it on a car. We had about 4 weeks to do that, but we did camp and we walk a lot in the places we were. So it was just incredible. That gift of life for us was, embracing a country that was embracing us, and getting to know this country in all its beauty, the people, all that. So that's a little bit of a personal story that, in particular, the accident, I don't think many people know.
Oh, geez. Well, we're glad you were okay, even if the car was not. Uh, you know, and speaking of close brushes with the Almighty, so to speak, like it's kind of an interesting segue into what we're talking about, because obviously you're an expert in your field, and you are working with your colleagues on this project about helping the world to cope with, deal with, and hopefully even eventually eradicate the COVID-19 virus. But I also know that a lot of people don't really know very much about genomics. So could you give us like a really, really short and sweet 101 on what this particular area of science is about?
Yeah, so what this whole project or this whole initiative is really using genomics, basically using all the knowledge we have over the years, we have developed over the many years. We have been studying this molecule of life called DNA and RNA, the molecules that really are the essence or the code of life, that have these letters, that 4 letters ACGT for the DNA, that are really our coding, our essence of who we are in all living organisms. So that goes for the virus, that goes for the humans. We all have DNA, we all have this personal code, same with the virus. So in April 2020, when the pandemic started, Jim Canada thought, well, we could use that code of life to understand how the virus is moving around, how the virus is spreading, how the virus is being transmitted. And we could also use that DNA and that code of life to understand why some people get more sick than others, why maybe in some cases we have, well, we know maybe older people with other diseases get typically more sick, but sometimes we see older people with many diseases that don't get very sick. And on the other hand, we see young people that are normally healthy and they get very sick and sometimes die. So is there anything in our DNA, is there anything in our genome that makes those differences? So they presented that project to the federal government and they got $40 million in funding, 20 million to study the tiny virus that has 30,000 letters in their code of life. It's not the little thing, it's only 30,000 letters. And you look at how they're changing, this little thing is changing the world. Our genome is 3 billion letters. So we have a much more complex genome. So there was, as I say, $20 million to sequence 150,000 viral genomes, 150,000 virus coming from people infected, and then $20 million to sequence 10,000 people. So much, a much smaller group, because the genome is much more complex, more difficult to analyze and all that. So that started in April. They got the funding, the project kicked off, and I joined as an executive director in June 2020, in the midst of the pandemic. At the time, I had made a decision in my life that, my partner and I, we decided to come back. So we moved to Colombia. I was in Colombia when I decided that we wanted to come back to Canada. And so I joined initially CanCOGeN from my house in Medellin, Colombia, leading the network in Canada. All, maybe one of the good things about this virus, and we can argue good or bad, but it has allowed all this virtual work that, like I see people coming from all over Canada today, and even outside Canada, as you say, Greg. We have people from many different places that can join today, and all this somewhat thanks to this pandemic that pushes into this virtual world. So, but coming back to the project, so the idea is to use genomics just to understand again how the virus spreads and how we get different diseases, and more than a purely scientific project, and maybe typical scientific projects will aim at solving a problem, having a methodology, solving a problem, and publishing the results, and having a nice article in one important scientific journal, Science, Nature, saying, okay, this is all our findings about this virus. Well, this project has also the objective of publishing the data, of course, and making scientific publications and solid scientific data. But more important than that, I would say, is that the objective is to inform public health and policy decisions in Canada. Just to give you an example, early in the pandemic, when BC, I think, was the first province that started to sequence those viral genomes, and they started to read these 30,000 letters of the viral genomes and do these all kinds of maps and phylogenetic trees that basically we can say are like a family tree. Who is your brother? Who is your sister? Who is your father? Where are you coming from? Same with the virus. The phylogenetic tree, who is your brother? Who is your father? And understanding these variants, how they connect and how they spread. So they started to do all this analytics and modeling and all that. And they started to see early in the pandemic that a lot of the cases in Vancouver and in BC were coming not from China, as we were thinking initially. And that was March or April 2020. So early, very early in the pandemic. They were not coming from Asia. They were coming from the US. So what decisions they had to make, the politicians and the policymakers, one of the first decisions was to close the border between Canada and the US. So here we are with a technology that's reading your DNA, reading these 30,000 letters, and making important decisions based on that by closing the US-Canada border, which is huge. For me, again, I have been 20 years in the world of genomics. And I would say that with this project that we call CanCOGeN, the Canadian COVID-19 Genomics Network, CanCOGeN is the first initiative where I see that we can really, I would say, take genomics out of the lab and make it inform real life and important decisions, like closing a border or locking down a city or deciding we need to wear masks or making these important policy decisions that we have made across this year and a half with the pandemic. A lot of them informed by genomics and the genomic surveillance we're doing with CanCOGeN.
That's really interesting, especially that last bit where you're talking about how genomics has moved its way out of the lab and into the public policy realm. And that kind of, I think, leads us a little bit more deeper into the theme of the conversation today. And that's around, well, you have all of this complexity. You have all of these different scientific, biological properties that are, at the core of what you're doing. You have people who are scared. You have people who are, not necessarily deeply conversant in, in scientific lingo or, or terminology or what have you. And you all have this amazing opportunity to help folks understand and deal with this worldwide pandemic in the way that it's affecting folks who live here in Canada and around the world. So how do you go through that process of translating that in ways that the everyday person can understand? Like what's some of that process that you had to go through with yourself and your colleagues to make that possible?
Yes, that's a really good question, because actually scientists, we are not trained to communicate. We actually trained the opposite. The more complicated jargon you use, the more clever you look. So the more difficult words and scientific terms, when you go to a conference, the better it is, because you're the best in the game. And here we are in the midst of this pandemic, where it's not just the science there. And that's why I say this genomics is out of the lab, because it's every person. We are all concerned about our own health, our families, our people that we know being sick, died, our loved ones, being infected, being sick. So it gets really, really personal. And we saw actually starting from January, we'll say, well, there was a bit of communications around COVID genomics and genomic surveillance, maybe at the end of 2020, but the real thing started when we started to talk about the variants, the famous variants of the virus that everybody now knows, like that scientists also love to call them with this weird name, B117, and that now the World Health Organization ended up with a clever idea of calling them alpha, beta, gamma, so that makes for people easier to understand, instead of using these weird numbers, or worse, using the English variant, or the UK variant, or the South African variant, or the Brazilian variant, that people start to put stigmas and say, okay, this is the one from Brazil, but that's bad. Oh no, this is the one from South Africa, so maybe it's worse. Or no, this is the one from England, so oh, that's definitely not good. So we move from that stigma into these numbers, but then that means that the real interest in terms of the general public started in January, when we started to talk publicly about those variants, and when we started actually to really see that those variants were a problem. So for me personally, communicating science has been a passion already. And I started, being active in social media and trying to use easy and common language to explain sometimes complex problems, like these variants, why DNA, why do we need to study genomics, why do we need to study the genome of a virus, what does it mean, those variants and all that. So that's a journey for me that has been going on, I would say, in the last 5 to 8 years, where I deliberately and specifically have been trying to train myself and get some training when I was at Genome BC here in Vancouver, even before when I was at Genome Quebec, get some training on how to communicate and how to engage and how to make genomics not being this complicated science, but really a technology that is helping us in so many areas of the economy, because genomics is not just for humans or virus. We can use genomics for forestry, for agriculture, for all living organisms. We can use genomics to understand and control health pathogens, or improve quality of products and all that.
Right.
So that's, again, communicating is really a passion. And I would say that I was also very pleased and positively surprised that if we think about comparing with maybe 2 years or 3 years ago, it was difficult for journalists to really get some of these concepts of genomics and variants, and a lot of the scientific concepts were difficult. But now I was very surprised when some of the journalists started to call me and CanCOGeN, and we started to get interviews. We got many. I was like, I think this is the project that has had the highest visibility in the history of Genome Canada. Of course, because it's for everybody. Everybody's interested about how genomics can help.
Right.
But the journalists also did a really good work, at least in Canada, to understand some of these complex concepts and have the right questions and bring to the people the right information and put it at the right level, so people can see the value of this technology, the potential this technology brings, and how this is really helping us in concrete ways during the pandemic.
100%. And, you raise a couple of really interesting points along the way, especially in terms of making sure that people can understand and not get the wrong idea or impression from the way that we communicate about things. So, that whole idea of making sure that we don't use, these weird garbled alphanumeric symbolisms for various variants, and that we also don't use geographic markers. You know that was a really big part of the problem at the very beginning, where, you know, especially in America, people calling it the China virus or what have you, and that has led directly to a really negative societal outcome, at least in North America and also in other places where, you know, people of Asian descent have faced, you know, backlash just walking down the street or going about their day-to-day lives and being subject to verbal and physical abuse and downright violence, and in some cases even murder. So you can see that it's really important that we get this kind of stuff right, because it has real world implications if we get it wrong. So what would be some of those more like practical lessons that you've learned that could then be passed on to the people who are here with us today about, you know, making sure that you come up with good ways to communicate these complex ideas in ways that are going to effectively communicate what you actually want to say, and also work to not communicate another message with unintended negative consequences?
Yeah, Greg, and those are really good points, because it's basically two different strategies. One is passing the message we want to pass, and for me, the message, you know, I try to make it very, very simple. As I say at the beginning, is genomics is a technology that for some people will look like science fiction. Oh, you know, looking at your DNA or looking at the DNA of the virus, and we think about modifying, and we think about all these kind of things out there that will be here in years and years to come. But is really make it simple and say, well, genomics is a simple technology. You can read the DNA like you read a book. You can get that, and you can do your phylogenetic, your family tree, and understand those basic concepts on how the technology is helping us understand that virus. And then the second piece for me that was key in all the communications is that this is not just about the science, as I say at the beginning, but it's really about informing public health and policy decisions. And that's a big difference, because the public health and policy decisions are, well, affecting each of us. That means that we can maybe not travel internationally, or we cannot get our families to come because there is a policy and there is a restriction, and there's what Public Health Canada is telling us we should do or not do in terms of lockdowns, movement, travel, and all that. So it's really taking the information to the people. At the end of the day, who is important in this story is the people. It's really connecting with people and connecting what you know, the science to what is important to each of us in our lives. And I did the same. I started doing the same, you know, in areas like forestry. Well, the forest, we all want to be in a beautiful forest with beautiful trees that, you know, is a healthy forest, and genomics can help us achieve that. So how genomics can help us achieve that? How genomics can help us now achieve a point where we feel that, you know, first we got vaccines that are actually coming from genomics, because these mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer, the Moderna, that use the messenger RNA are based also in many, many years of research on this molecule, the mRNA, the messenger RNA, and on all other technologies that are making possible to have the vaccine, Pfizer and Moderna, and all these vaccines are available now in a record time, where we see now we get to a point where we are really between this balance that we can talk maybe a little bit later, between the vaccine and the variant. There's a bit of a race. Who's going to win here? Are we going to get all vaccinated in time to control the variants? Are the variants going to win? And we're seeing really the light at the end of the tunnel. So that is the positive message, is the message of what I want to transfer. And the other strategy, the second that you mentioned there, is how we avoid misinformation. And we have had a lot of that during this pandemic, and it has been one of the biggest problems for science during the pandemic, because there's very strong and important voices out there in social media and even, you know, in the news, and many, you know, they use all kinds of creative ways to get to people, informing and providing the wrong information. about vaccines, the wrong information about the origins of the virus, the wrong information about our susceptibility or not, even the pandemic in general. People saying that that's really not real, but all kinds of false and non-scientific and actually not true statements that have done a lot of harm, in particular around vaccines. When you start, creating all these fears around vaccines, well, we challenge our solution. The main solution we have for this pandemic, which is vaccine, get challenged with a lot of that. So with misinformation, again, the challenge is different, because what we try is to counter that with solid scientific data, always back up by data, always, using data to support your comments or your statements. In particular for me, as the leader of CanCOGeN, I always, it's not about me thinking or me believing, it's about the data. It's about the data. What is the data showing us? How can we interpret the data, and how can we use the data to guide our decisions? And as I say, guide our public health and policy. So again, two different strategies, but two very important points that have been critical during this pandemic.
Absolutely. And I mean, this has sort of been you're working through, the crucible of this worldwide global pandemic. But of course, you're also, in addition to everything else, you are also a person who has a great deal of experience, as a public speaker and, as a communicator. We know that you're a past TEDx speaker. What is your, what's your general approach to how you take on communicating effectively with others? Like, what is your basic philosophy of communication, and how does that help you to get your message across, in a clear and simplified manner?
Yeah, Greg. Well, I say, well, there are different things, but for me, I think the first is passion. I think people, when they see, you're passionate about things, and then of course the underlying knowledge, but then how to transfer that knowledge. It would be a whole different story if I come here and I tell you, well, actually, CanCOGeN this week accomplished 150,000 genomes. That was our target, and we have published 70,000 genomes in GSA. The facts, those are the facts. If I come and tell you here, we actually have completed 150,000 genomes 10 months ahead of time, because our schedule was to finish that in April 22. And here we are, done, 150,000 genomes. Canada, kudos, we did very well. And on top of that, last December, we were at 3,000 genomes in GSA, and today we're at 70,000. So all the public health labs in Canada are really putting their efforts, are making everything possible to share the data, to put that data in public databases, and to make us get to the 70,000 genomes that we have today, all shared across the planet, to help us in a global, not just Canada, but on a global scale, to understand and control this pandemic. So again, the facts, the data, you need the facts, you need the data, you need the numbers, you need to have that. But it's how you package that and how you present that and how you, well, for me, is the passion, is the extra kind of, you could call it the Latino touch. I don't know, because I have a lot of Latino friends that are maybe but for me, is that little music that goes with the communication, that little passion, and the fact that you bring that to life and you make it relevant. You make it relevant, as I say, connecting with people. You make it relevant to people. So, it's all about, I often, when we wear, maybe here sometimes it's more difficult because with cameras and virtually sometimes more difficult, but I always try to also get back to people with questions. Like, I used to make presentations where I will just ask people if they have done a genetic test themselves, if they think, what do they think? So a little bit sometimes reverting this dialogue and bringing the audience, more to life. That's sometimes, of course, when you're in a TEDx or when you are in a TV or just even an article in the news is more difficult. So that's on those. I think the critical component is as the example I gave is bring those extra. If I just give you the number today, 70,000, that sounds good, that sounds interesting, but that doesn't tell you the whole story behind.
That's
The
right.
70,000 is a big, big, big accomplishment because we were at 3,000 in December. And we spent almost a year getting to 3,000. And in 4 months, we are at 70,000. That's huge. So it's those other contexts that make your story a passionate story and a success story, or maybe just one more story there that, do we care? Maybe not, maybe yes, but
No, I think that's really fair. And context is so powerful and so very important, especially when when you're delivering a message that is, that is driven by evidence, that is a data driven kind of thing. And as you say, it can be quite dry, or you can jazz it up, or I guess in your case, maybe you add a little samba to science or something like that. So you've got, you got a little bit of that music and that groove to it. I'm a Caribbean person, so by descent. So I was like, yeah, all I hear in my head now is samba and merengue and bachata and all these different rhythms in my head. And what I'm saying, yes, the Dr. Catalina is doing her scientific thing, and there's a nice rhythm going on in the background. So when you work with your team, what are some of the tools that you use internally in terms of communicating with your team to get everybody on the same page, to make sure that you're working collaboratively and effectively? Like, what are some of your internal team, because you are a leader, of a group of individuals as well. So in your leadership role, how do you communicate your message? How do you enroll people into the larger vision that's bigger than your team and keep everybody on track and moving forward and working cooperatively and collaboratively together?
yes, well, I have my direct team that works directly with me with CanCOGeN, and for that we have meetings. Well, our group weekly meetings where we just go so very clear on what every person should do, what's the responsibility. But then again, I think for this project in particular, because again, it touches everybody, is also this fact that the work you're doing is contributing to something much larger. That is not just, of course, you need to fill this form and you need to prepare this budget and you need to prepare this document or this PowerPoint presentation. And that takes time and sometimes it's difficult. But beyond that, there is this biggest purpose of that. And that has been for me, not just in CanCOGeN. Now I would say it's easier because we have so clear, the pandemic in front of us, and we are in a project that is at the core of what's happening with this pandemic. But in other projects, it's always bringing what is the bigger purpose of all what we're doing. How are we helping, in my view, humanity or us or the company be better? So it's bringing this combination on the clarity of the task and the fully operational and logistics on, doing the meetings, communicating well, and bringing this bigger purpose. And the other key for me also is, and it's a word that we use a lot now, but it's a very significant word for me, and it's empowering. And empowerment is such a critical component of being a leader. I think you're a better leader the more you empower and the more you give flexibility with of course, understanding that we have milestones to accomplish. It's not that you go and do whatever you want. We have much to accomplish, and you have your deliverables, you have your milestones that you have to accomplish, you have your tasks and all that. But then there's this way to empower and try and find. Also, what I always try to do is what are people passionate about? I have one of the individuals in my team that is truly passionate about diversity. And she is fully in charge of helping us with CanCOGEN to bring all the EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion principles to life, from the bio side, from the human side. And naturally, of course, because she's passionate about, she can drive that, and she can be completely empowered. So it's looking at that, those aspects. Now, the other piece that maybe I want to share here is that as part of the network that we built with CanCOGEN, we have to work with the provincial health labs across Canada. So I have to work with the provincial health labs in BC, in Ontario, in all the provinces. And well, I don't know those people, so I have to, get introduced on a Zoom call and get to know and get to build a relationship virtually. And I have to ask them, of course, we're giving them money, but then I have to ask them many things in return of the money. I have to ask them to put their data in public data. I have to ask them to put the data in a national data. I have to ask them to sometimes do more things than what they are used to do, or different things. Like for them now, the provincial labs, top number one priority is to get those sequences of the virus, to provide the information to the public health officers in the province, and to make the provincial decision. The priority for them is not to put this data in an international database out there that is going to be used by global leaders. But that's a priority for CanCOGEN, and it's a priority for Canada. So how do I communicate these and put pressure on them to deliver something we need, but is not their priority? That's a very, very big, and I'm not their boss. They are not reporting to me. I give them money, but nothing in the money we give them says you have to, it's part of the requirements, but they could perfectly not do it because, and actually they have good excuses not to do it because they are super busy. They are working 24 hours a day. They are working 7 days a week, and sharing the data for them is not top number one priority.
Okay.
So what I have done there is to, every time I have these teleconferences with them, and sometimes they can be pretty tense, of course, all virtual, and everybody's like, yeah, and this is what we need to do. Okay, not sure we have the time, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the people. It's all like, no, we cannot, no. And then I start to try and move these, and what's in it for you? If you in BC share your data and Alberta shares their data, maybe you know that the P1 variant or the alpha or the beta variant now are preponderant or are very high numbers in Alberta, and you can use that data in BC to make your decision. So it's going to be a benefit for you too. It's an effort, but it's a benefit for you. So it's every time, what's in it for you? What's in it? You have to make an effort, but what are you getting in return?
Right.
So it's a little bit turning the game and trying to make people also feel proud again. That proud moment I was mentioning. Same. Now everybody today, all these labs that were frustrated with me telling them you have to share, they're all now so proud because we have 70,000 data submitted into that. They're happy, they're celebrating. It was painful. It was a painful journey this month, but we are all happy now that we did it, and we did it together.
Well, there you go. And that's what's the powerful thing, right? You can inspire that sense of unified purpose and bring folks together in order to achieve in that sort of a way. And those are powerful principles of leadership, looking towards how you can encourage people to get to the place that you want to go by also making it very clear what they're going to get out of it too, right? In allowing them to feel a certain sense of ownership over something that you need, and show them in which ways it's going to actually help them get what they need as well. Like that's just powerful, and and critical leadership skills. And this kind of leadership skill is absolutely necessary to be communicated effectively in order for it to take hold. So You know, we've sort of been chatting for a while now, though. So now I'm open to kind of letting more folks involved into the conversation. So for those of you who are participating with us, you know, Dr. Catalina, she's gone through quite a bit of information. She's raised a bunch of different things. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat box, or you can use the raise hand function. I can acknowledge you, and we can come into the conversation, and we'll bring you in to have to ask that question, and then you just unmute yourself and let us see you. Okay. So Natalie, I see your hand. I'm going to bring you in. Go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
Good morning. It's morning over here near Chicago. So thank you so much for you know, sitting with us, Dr. Lopez-Correa, while we learn a lot about the science that you're working on, but also about leadership. That's very, very inspirational and helpful. And I would love to be a fly on the wall as you convince public health departments and stakeholders to go along the journey that takes them above their duty. My question is specific to Quebec. I lived in Quebec for 10 years, and bringing my partner, who is American, over to Quebec and applying for permanent residency and all of that was very long and tedious. And it was like, it really was working with two different countries, it felt like. So my question to you is, having to work across spectrums of stakeholdership, have you been met with additional tedium or additional obstacles having to work with Quebec if you do?
Well, you know, I actually, first, when I immigrated to Canada, I started in Quebec, in Montreal. So we have to go ourselves, my partner and myself, through all the immigration process. And I know exactly what you're talking about. It's really, we actually made a mistake. We thought that when we applied to Quebec, we were applying to Canada. We only filled the federal form. And we figured later that we had to fill a whole different parallel form.
Yes.
That was the Quebec form. So that delayed our, you know, whole application for maybe a year, I think, almost. We lost a year just because of, we didn't understand the system until we got there and we saw, yeah, Quebec is different. So yeah, Quebec is different. and in terms of our project, public health, well, I would say I was lucky enough that I knew a lot of the players in Quebec from my time, 8 years I spent in Montreal. I speak French, which also helps make the connections, because again, it's all about the people, it's building this connection. So,
and it's so important in Quebec.
Absolutely. And when I started with CanCOGeN, I think one of the first provincial labs I met was, you know, the leadership at the INSPQ, Institut National Santé Publique Quebec, just to get them, you know, to know each other, to communicate, to see what the challenges, and you know, I have to keep a very close relationship with them. I have to say that during the process, you know, one of my biggest challenges, as I mentioned, is the data sharing. So make sure that those labs share the data across Canada and internationally. And I have to say that I'm super positively surprised that for the international data sharing, Quebec is the one completely leading the way in Canada for the moment. Of course, the others will be joining, and there will be, but Quebec has done an incredible work. So sometimes we think, what is interesting in that also is that, you know, they're really good at sharing internationally, maybe not that good at sharing at a Canadian level. So you see all the dynamics. There is really the perfect example. Like, yeah,
that makes sense.
We're good, we share with the world, but with Canada, let's wait a little bit, you know, we get our things here. But what is, you know, for me, the most amazing thing with this job is that I get to Ontario, for instance. Ontario is a whole different situation. So each province is very, very different, how they're managing their data, how they're generating their data. And it's a lot, maybe I can make another personal comment here, just to say that I did my high school, and I'm still friends with my high school classmates that sometimes I see when I go to Colombia. And I wasn't the most brilliant student in high school. I was like good. I never, had to, I passed everything with good marks, but I was not like, oh, she is the most brilliant, she's going to be a scientist because she's brilliant. No, I wasn't the one that people say she's brilliant, she's going to be a scientist. I would say good, but not super. And then one of my friends from high school, I would say maybe 8 years ago, she told me like, how come if you were not that brilliant in school, how come you're now these leadership positions in Canada and doing science and like you were out there? And somebody else, I didn't answer, somebody else from high school, because we were in a group, somebody else say, emotional intelligence. This is what she has. That was her interpretation. And I was like, I don't even know if I have, but I like connecting with people. And I think that's what has helped with this relationship with the provincial lab for me. It's connecting, trying to connect with people. I mean, I'm not their friends, but we connect very often. And we always start with some personal touch and, just getting to know people. And it's not that I do that because, oh, this is what I need, because I like connecting with people. Because I like their stories. I like to share my stories, and I like for them to share their stories and to be human, to
Genuine connection.
Yeah, to connect.
Yeah, that's big. Absolutely. And Natalie, thank you for jumping in there and joining in the conversation. I'm gonna bring Donna into the conversation and say thank you to Natalie. Unfortunately, Donna's camera is not recognizing right now, but I know her microphone was working. So Donna, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
I had 2 questions. Which one did you mean?
You can start with one, and then we'll see if we can get to the other one.
Okay, so the communication question I had was, what communication successes and challenges have you had with policymakers and government officials? So we asked about your coworkers and the people who understand the science, but when you're trying to convey these complex ideas to people who need to actually put them into practice, how has that gone well, and what have been your challenges?
Yeah, many challenges, and that's interesting. And I remember situations where working with more politicians and policymakers and people that are not, again, as you say, no scientific background or anything. They will just go sometimes the other extreme and say, well, if this genomics is so good, how come we are not sequencing all the virus? We are actually now sequencing about 10 to 15% of the positive cases in Canada. So in some regions, we go maybe up to being able to sequence 25, 30%, sometimes 60%. But in average, in general, during the pandemic, we have been sequencing about 15%, 10%, 15% of all the positive cases. So for me, is really, again, trying to give the right information and don't oversell. Like people will think, okay, this is the magic tool, and once I get all the sequence, I will be able to solve all the problems. Is creating realistic expectations. I am now part of what they call the Variants of Concern Leadership Table. That's coordinated by Deputy Minister Stephen Lucas from Health Canada. And we have lots of people there that are not scientists, are policymakers, are trying to, of course, work on this pandemic and trying to see how we can develop policies that help us effectively control this pandemic. And it is really a matter of, I think, finding that balance between the right level of science, which is, again, the data and the level of science, and also translating that in their language, what it means for you. So if you sequence, just to go back to my example, if you sequence all the virus, 100% of the virus, well, actually, you spend a lot of money that will not give you more answers. If you take a group of 100 individuals that got infected in the same city or the same neighborhood, let's say, in the same outbreak, exactly the same outbreak, if you sequence 10 of them, you already know what is the variant. So it's bringing those examples, is bringing that to what, you know, and again, it's connecting with them in the sense of what is their concern, what is really that's worrying them, and how can I help them solve the challenges. I'm facing my challenges with, you know, my network and making people, making sure people share. They're facing the challenges in deciding how to deploy the vaccines, how to make the policies, close the border, open the border, close an airport, open an airport, let travel, let lock down a city, all these big decisions. And how can we help them make those decisions? So yeah, it's again about understanding, making the language simple, but also bringing the concrete data.
Well, that's great. And I know, Donna, you had a second question. So if you want to go ahead, and then I think I might have a question after that too, but you go ahead, Donna, and ask yours.
Well, the second question was less about the communication and more about your sequencing and the distinction between, in mid-January of 2020, China released the DNA sequencing of the virus, and then that is what Pfizer and Moderna used to sequence their mRNA vaccines, and then the science came from there. But now you're saying that you've sequenced 150,000 and published 70,000. Are these variants, or is this a higher level of sequencing so that they were just, say, sequencing the spike protein or getting a very rudimentary level of sequencing and you were going beyond that? Or is that because you found 150,000 essentially variants, not variants of concern, but variants of the original strain?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we actually, well, all are good. We actually, the 150,000, they all, inside those are some variants of concern, because we have some of the alpha variants, some of the beta, some of the gamma variants here in Canada. So part of the 70,000 and the 150 we have sequenced, they represent those variants, but they all of them, all the sequence we actually have published already. I think in that international database where we have 70,000, there's about 2 million sequences of virus across the planet. Many countries are now sequencing the virus, and they all somewhat, of course, is again, think about a family tree. They all come from that initial group of virus, or that initial virus actually that came from China. So they all come from there, and they start to have small, tiny differences. That this virus mutates very, very rapidly. It's almost every 2 days is mutating, and it mutates and it changes when it's inside people. So the more infections, the more people infected, the more possibilities we have to have variants. And some of those variants are just simple variants that we use, obviously, non-concerning variants that we use to track the virus, how it moves, how it transmits. And lots of the ones we have sequenced here are those variants that we can distinguish, but are not concerning. And then we have now the 4 variants of concern that the World Health Organization has classified as concerning because they are more transmissible, or because they are having, linked to maybe a more severe disease, or because in still not confirmed, but in some cases there's suspicion that they might not respond to certain treatments, or because there's potential suspicion that they might not respond or be effective against certain vaccines. Some vaccines might not be effective, but that's still, for the vaccines and the treatment, that's still not confirmed, but it's clearly confirmed that they are more transmissible or more leading to a more severe disease. So again, those 150,000 that we have are part of those variants that the entire world is sequencing and understanding. And based on this mutation and changes, very rapid changes of the virus, but they not all represent variants of concern.
Oh, for sure. And so I kind of want to tie some of these different strands and themes that we've seen throughout, and that have been brought in by others as well, and kind of circle back a little bit to one of the things that you were talking about earlier, which was around, the stigmatization of how we use certain words and verbiage to explain, but then also talking about how we, as Canada, with your group, have gone through and sequenced all of these, these tens of thousands of genomes. I guess what I want to get at is the virus has been shown to affect different groups of people in different ways, different ethnicities. And I'd be curious to know, first of all, sort of what your personal viewpoint on that is. Like, what are some of the reasons why that might be happening? And then also to just kind of talk about, how do you talk about that in the community? How do you communicate around that issue where we're having these differential impacts, whether, you've got folks who are in, lower income neighborhoods or indigenous communities or what have you? Like, how do you talk about that, and how do you get people to really take that aspect of the pandemic more seriously?
Yeah, and Greg, that is so important. I think the biggest challenge for me, and I think for the world, with this pandemic is equity. That's really the biggest challenge, and it goes at many different levels. In terms of the disease, initially we got some data that potentially in the US, some groups like the Black community or the Latino community were having maybe more cases or more severe cases. And then, but there's such a close also relationship with maybe lower income, less access to care, to preventive measures, to early care that avoid, a more dramatic outcome with the disease. So that's still, we still, don't have a very clear picture that, let's say, certain variants will target certain populations more than others. But it's clear that when you don't have access to healthcare, and I see it, I spent the first year of the pandemic in Colombia, and well, Colombia has extremely poor regions of the country that were completely devastated and completely just, I would say, almost destroyed by COVID. And some of that was not even reported. And some of those people that died in those communities are not even reported as COVID. So I think a lot of that, we're starting to see that some of those numbers and some of this data that we have are not really representing what really is happening in the world. So equity in terms of even how we report, and equity in terms of on access to healthcare from those communities. The other huge issue we have now with equity is the vaccines. We're lucky to be in Canada or the US where we have access to those vaccines. I'm now fully vaccinated. I got my 2 doses. I'm like, well, life could, in my mind, almost think that we could almost go back to normal. I saw friends last week, like I haven't seen in a year. And you start to see like, okay, that little taste that we can potentially get back to potentially, seeing people, socializing, all these. But that's not the story for Latin America. And that's not the story for Africa.
Right.
And that's not the story for so many other regions. So I have been, and I'm trying to be in my position with CanCOGeN. Of course, we're so privileged. We got $40 million to sequence this genome. We got the funding, we got the technology. We're helping the world use this data to understand. But I think we need to do more. And what I'm pushing now is also Canada help some of these countries that are struggling to get genomic sequences, to set up their facilities and to set up, to help with potentially some training and in other ways, so that as the World Health Organization is saying, and they keep on telling us from the beginning of the pandemic, is basically we are not safe until we are all safe. Right. And if half of the world or more is not vaccinated and has no access to vaccines, we're not going to go back to normal. Even though we think in our little bubble in Canada, we think that we're good because we are vaccinated, we can see our friends. But that's not the world. So are we going to stay in this bubble, or are we going to really move into a global world? And I also say, I remember telling some of the journalists when we were talking about the virus, I said, well, the virus sees no border.
Right.
And yet we keep our data. Oh, my data from the virus in DC stays in DC because we have to protect it. The virus couldn't care less. It's moving freely around the planet. And it doesn't care if you got access to vaccines or not. And if you got access to genomic technologies or not, you just go and spread. And I think we need to shift, and we have a unique opportunity here to change things. Like, with climate change is unique opportunity for, this is not going to be the last pandemic. This is the first, but it's not the last.
Right.
This is our new normal. We're going to have new viruses that will be coming, and we will have to address this in a very different way. And that means data sharing, that means global, that means inclusion, and that means safety.
Right. And so I guess my next question for you would be around, how do you bring all of those strands together in terms of what you personally have learned and experienced and gone through as a leader, as a scientist, as a public communicator? Like, what is the greatest lesson that you have learned in your leadership position about the human condition, about our ability to share and to communicate with one another, and to have each other hear each other on matters that are important? Like, what's the main lesson that you've pulled from all of that experience?
Well, Greg, I think it's interesting on the data sharing. That has been my battle from the very beginning. We initially produced a whole document describing the barriers for data sharing in Canada, and the technical barriers, the legal barriers, the regulatory, the all kinds, the capacity. People, as I say, they were maxed, they had no time. And then at the end, we put one that was the cultural barrier. Like, people maybe don't think this is important. And even though, you got the capacity, potentially you have the technology, the regulations doesn't say that there's nothing that precludes you from sharing the data. Right. For you, as the director of the lab, that's not important. So it's more the culture, is the piece that is the human. Again, it's going back to that human aspect. Where really, for me, the lesson is listening and really opening your eyes. That sometimes the answer to some of these challenges is in places where you don't, because you always, at least in my mind, scientific mind, I think more the challenges would be, the technical, the capacity, the legal, but then you figure that it's a lot of opening your eyes and your ears and embracing these challenges in a whole different way. That for me has been the lesson. Is the technology is there, genomics is here, and the technology is ready. It's how we use it. And for that, I think, again, we have to be open, creative, innovative, and ready to listen.
Well, I think that that's really powerful, and a really good spot to like make that shift now, because now I'm gonna bring it out to everyone here and just ask folks if, as they've been listening, are there other comments and observations that they want to share based on the conversation that they've heard up until this point? So if you want to just throw in a thought, not even a question necessarily, just a comment or an observation, just put your hand up, and we'll recognize you here, and we'll get Dr. Lopez-Correa to engage with that. So any
Greg, maybe can I ask a question to people?
Yeah, go ahead.
Just for me to know if people have heard during this, maybe during this pandemic about genomics. If they have heard that, because I've heard many people telling me that during the pandemic with the virus, that for them was the first opportunity to hear about genomics. And if you hear during this pandemic, or if you knew about genomics was before that, and that genomics could give you a potential to understand virus and all this. So I would love to hear maybe comments on that.
Yeah. So I have got Sarah here. So go ahead and unmute yourself and ask and make your comment, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here today. I am a policy maker municipally in Vancouver Island, like you, but in the rural area. I'm also the small community director on the UBCM executive. And something that I've really found is a sort of disconnect in understanding. So, you know, we talked about briefly in the beginning where there was sort of the fake news or like the sensational shiny things that people want to believe. And so I've gotten my second vaccine also, and I'm ready to sort of move forward with this phase of my life, recognizing that there will be more, that there's lots of different kinds of diseases that move from animals to humans. And I really see, you know, sort of my future, like you and Greg, Dr. Catalina, is that it's about education now. It's about educating people to the level where they can understand science and they can believe in, you know, I took a course and it was like how freshly squeezed dissent or discord is more popular than truth or facts or whatever. And so as a politician, I have to appreciate the majority rule. And if the majority of people are maybe concerned about the powers of the government to shut down borders, to, you know, like vaccinate some people but not others. We've seen outbreaks in meat packing plants, but they didn't bring the vaccines to the meat packing plants. That would have made sense. We instead made it this, you know, people who have Twitter accounts, they can get vaccines and they can like hunt them down, but people who don't, well, sorry about them, right? So it's sort of about the equalizing, and I think you called it EDI before. And I'm really interested in this sort of, this seems really hierarchical, but like the scooping from the bottom, right? So like, how do we get people who maybe are vaccine hesitant or, you know, don't believe the pandemic, you know, like how do we get people who are sort of intentionally putting their heads in the sand or, you know, just acting from a place of fear to understand the way that things are moving now. So it's very cultural, right? Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And you know, yeah, as I say, equity, diversity, and inclusion are so critical. And your example of the meat plant is that, you know, so, and we have other situations, like I have a situation in South Spring Island, for instance, where I think they were having the system to book, as you have the online system to book your vaccines. And as soon as you get into the online system, you can only book your vaccine in December this year, like your second dose. And people are like, you know, December, how come? The whole, you know, it's impossible. And then suddenly some people just decided they will pick up the phone and call, and they got the vaccine the next week because the system has a challenge and has a glitch or whatever. There was a problem with the system. And so, you know, how can we ensure that, you know, it is inclusive and that people that we think about, as you say, from a bottom up. It's not everybody has access to a computer. Not everybody has access to Twitter. Not everybody has access to social media. Some people will get the information because they pick up the phone. Some people will get the information because it's just, but maybe now it's maybe more difficult to just walk and go and ask the question because everything is virtual, but there are ways, and we have to be open to include people in these different ways. That's something we're trying also to do, in particular on the human side, with when we're sequencing not the virus but the humans. We also want to make sure that we include a diverse population of Canada, that we don't end up just selecting a group of people in Vancouver, a group of people in Toronto, and a group of people in Montreal, and that's it. We will get 10,000 people, but are we representative of Canada? Are we representative of the diversity of this country? No. So many challenges up front.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And thank you so much for your contribution there, Sarah. It was very helpful and definitely added to the conversation. And so now I'm just going to move here towards the ending here. So I just want to take an opportunity, first of all, to thank you, Dr. Lopez-Correa, for making the time. You're an extremely busy person, and very grateful that you were able to make the time to be with us here today. I think we all learned something. We talked about a lot of different aspects of the issue, learned a little bit more, and I think we're able to open our minds around the impact of science on policy, on the world in which we live, the social determinants, the impact on diversity and equity, both within the country and on a global level. We touched on so many aspects, and we really hope that, your work will allow the world to get ahead of the virus, to get the vaccines out there, to get things under control, and to really make an incredible change. So thank you so much for that. And just hang on for just 1 second. I want to tell everybody here that we at VoiceShare are very pleased and grateful that you've made the time to be here. Whether you're here with us live or you're watching on the replay, I also want to give you the opportunity to do something incredible. So if you are here and you're watching and live on the video, and for those who are watching the replay too, we are offering you the opportunity to work directly with us on a strategy session where we can schedule. It's a 90-minute thing, $250 normally, but I'm giving it as a gift to everybody who's participating in Shared Voices in Conversation. So we can sit down, talk about your issues, your pressures from the perspective of what you're doing with your leadership in terms of what you're doing to increase inclusivity in what you're doing, and to also be able to effectively communicate your strategies. We'll do a deep dive into your operations, into how you're dealing with your talent, the culture of your organization, the leadership within it. And I'll come up with some strategies that I'll share with you. We'll be able to schedule that right in and have that opportunity to do that deep dive. I will take the time for folks who have participated in this process. If this is something that you're interested in signing up for, just write yes into the chat box, and I will send you the direct link for you to be able to register, and we'll get you signed up for us to do those kinds of deep, in-depth strategy sessions where we can talk about the sorts of issues and themes that came out in today's conversation, as well as others that are pertinent to your business, to your organization, to your consultancy, etc. So I'm very excited about offering that opportunity on behalf of VoiceShare, and having those kinds of avenues opened up and having your minds expanded to the potential of doing something impactful at a global scale to help people to be better, to live better, to be healthier and safer, like Dr. Catalina is doing. If I can help in any small way, I'd be excited to do that. So, Dr. Catalina, I am so pleased that we had the opportunity to have this conversation. I'm very much looking forward to hearing and seeing and learning more about what you do moving forward. So if there's anything that you would just want to say in conclusion to everybody who's participated in the call.
Absolutely. Well, first, to you, Greg, thank you so much for inviting me and for giving me the honor to open this speaker series session. It's just I think it is so important to have those spaces where we just talk about how to communicate, the leadership skills and all that. So thanks for organizing. And I want to thank all the participants too for the comments from the chat. I saw everybody engaged through the entire time through the chat, for your comments, questions, the ones that came here on video to give their comments live. It really has been really a great space today. So thank you. I invite you all to look at what we're doing. Of course, we are on Twitter, CanCOGeN. You can find me, C. Lopez-Correa, Twitter, LinkedIn. We're sharing a newsletter that we publish every month with the information. We try to shape that newsletter basically for policymakers and just the public health decisions, but also there's a lot of information for the general public on how we're doing in terms of the genome sequencing, the data we're generating. So again, thanks a lot for having me. I think basically the lesson, again, for the pandemic is we're all in this together, and we have to work together to be out of this and just make the world a better place after this COVID-19.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think that we all have a role to play, and we all can band together, and we can be supportive of those folks who are making those steps in the scientific realm. But we can also do our part in the political realm, can do our part in the economic realm, in the civic realm. There are so many different ways that we as individuals can contribute to that larger process. And so I want to thank you for opening up people's minds to that. I want to thank you for sharing your expertise and your amazing skill set. And folks, make sure you get an opportunity if you want to go and go back. If you're here live and you want to see that video, there will be the replay will be shared with you in the very near future. Come back, take notes, share what you can. Dr. Catalina, I'm not sure if there are ways that if people wanted to ask more questions or whatever, if there's some kind of avenue that people can do that. But you can let me know that, and I'll share it when I share the replay. And then I'll tell you folks that in terms of keeping to the promises, we always make sure that we end things on time. And that we make sure that everybody gets exactly what they need when they need it within the time frames allocated. So in the interest of keeping that promise, I want to make sure that we do wrap up before the half hour. You will also note that Catalina Lopez-Correa has added the newsletters and information link directly into the chat box for those of you who are live, so you can check that out. I will also share that when I share the link for the replay, so folks will have the opportunity to check that out as well. So for those of you who are with us on the call live, please just in one word, just type into the chat box how you're feeling about the presentation and about the information and about this experience overall. Just like one word, quick hits. And if any of you want to also give us any direct feedback, there will also be an opportunity provided to all of you to provide feedback on the exact on everything that you've learned and seen and experienced today. So again, my name is Greg Frankson. I am the founder and CEO of VoiceShare Inc. I am very, very happy and pleased that you were all able to share with us today. And I wish you all the best for your day, for the rest of your week, and ask you again to make expressive inclusion, where leadership, equity, diversity, inclusion, and effective communication come together, the core of what you do, because in doing so, you will be able to make a huge difference in the world, to create and inspire change. And of course, it will permit you to own the voice that you share. So once again, thank you to everybody. Have yourself a wonderful day, and we will catch up to you next time. Be well and take care.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.